Hi, Mark, and today we have to talk about the success in the negotiations on the Northern Ireland Protocol between British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The long-standing dispute has maybe come to an end. According to a press conference of the two, Great Britain and the EU have reached an agreement on the Northern Ireland Protocol. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak presented their agreement in Windsor. It could mark the conclusion of a years-long stalemate in the long history of Britain's exit from the European Union. The EU and Great Britain want to finally settle the Brexit dispute over Northern Ireland. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen travelled to Windsor to reach a possible agreement with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. She was excited to start a new chapter with our partner and friend, as she wrote on Twitter, before being welcomed by Sunak in Windsor, near London. Sunak and von der Leyen presented and commented on the outcome of the talks at a joint press conference that ended shortly before 5 p.m. Mechanisms designed to make life easier for people in Northern Ireland had largely been leaked in recent days. They want to give everyone involved enough time to examine the details and form an opinion on this set of rules, they say. The Northern Ireland Protocol has regulated the status of the British region in the north of the Emerald Isle since Brexit a good 3 years ago. It's part of the Brexit Treaty on Britain's exit from the EU and stipulates that the customs border between the UK and the EU runs in the Irish Sea. This was to prevent border checks between the British part of the Emerald Isle and the EU member Ireland, and that any have to be introduced there. Otherwise, it was expected that the conflict about unification of the two parts of Ireland would flare up again. But the checks were also causing difficulties in intra-British trade. Overall, the protocol strengthens trade links between Ireland and Northern Ireland, but weakens trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And union supporters in Northern Ireland felt increasingly cut off from Britain. London therefore wanted to renegotiate the deal. Britain has been out of the European Union for 3 years following a referendum, and the EU now consists of 27 members. The new deal alterations between Britain and the European Union will eliminate any sense of a border in the Irish Sea, is what British Prime Minister Sunak said. The agreement provides for different lanes for goods coming into Northern Ireland. The green lane I mentioned earlier is for imports that remain in Northern Ireland, and this is where customs formalities are supposed to fall. And the red lane is for goods and products that go further to Ireland, and that means into the EU. Here the formalities and customs regulations remain in place. Sunak was convinced that the agreement would solve the practical problems of many people. If food is available in Britain, it will also be available in Northern Ireland. That's what both said. And those who have a package delivered no longer have to deal with bureaucracy. The new so-called Windsor framework, as the agreement, the legal framework for the Northern Ireland Protocol is called, is a legally formulated set of rules, but would make life easier for the people of the region, although it's an agreement in principle at the moment. Ursula von der Leyen stressed the importance of the agreement for peace in Northern Ireland. This peace, which the Good Friday Agreement made possible, can continue to be guaranteed this way. And then the head of the Commission was to be received by King Charles. In the evening, Sunak wanted to inform Parliament about the outcome of the talks, so after I'm filming this. It's now eagerly awaited whether Sunak will also find support for the agreement from Brexit hardliners in his Conservative Party and, of course, the Northern Irish party DUP. The DUP has been blocking the formation of a new government in Northern Ireland for months in protest at the regulation. As I said, the Northern Ireland Protocol is part of the Brexit Treaty on Britain's exit from the EU, and it does stipulate that the customs border between Great Britain and the EU runs in the Irish Sea. And I can't strengthen this often enough. This was to prevent border checks between Northern Ireland and the rest of the island, because it would have, if we had a hard border there, it would have brought back the conflict or the so-called troubles that caused 3,000 deaths. But the Czechs have produced some problems for people bringing goods from Ireland, from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But not only that made trouble, even the meeting from von der Leyen's meeting with the king made trouble, because the king usually stays out of daily politics and is therefore considered unusual that he meets von der Leyen on the very day when a controversial agreement with Brussels is to be concluded. And critics accuse Sunak of using the king for his purposes. A spokesman for the Prime Minister stressed that the decision as to whom the king would receive rested solely with the palace. But Sunak is under pressure all the time, also from his predecessor Boris Johnson, who may be hoping for a comeback by presenting himself as a proponent of pure Brexit doctrine. You will see that tomorrow. But it's now considered unlikely that the Brexit hardliners in the Conservative Party will revolt. Brexit champion and Secretary of State for Northern Ireland Steve Baker was very optimistic about the expected agreement on Monday. The Prime Minister is on the verge of a fantastic agreement for all parties involved in talks with the EU. That's what the Conservative politician told reporters at Downing Street. Recently, there was speculation about Baker's resignation in protest against an agreement. And whether this agreement is really what it promises, we will not know until the full text is available. At the moment, when I'm filming this, I can't rate it yet. And of course, not what to think of the statements made at this press conference, although it was very interesting to see that. But of course, I'll keep you posted as soon as I know more. Oh, and I'm filming late because they finally came to a conclusion. I was not really believing that I still could film something on it today, so don't be surprised about 1 or 2 sentences in tomorrow's video, because I thought that would be today's video, and I would have to... And now I just switched places because I still was able to do the video after the press conference, which I haven't expected in the first place. But the press conference was really interesting, not only what I told you already in the video, but there were some points which I'm really curious to read the whole text. And that's what I always tell you. I told you this especially on the Japan deal the UK made. You have to read the full text. I always say this on the Brexit treaty and on the TCA. You have to read the full text if you don't want to fall for some fake news on those agreements. And the same will be with the Windsor framework now. I have to read the full text to get the full picture, and I just can, if you have the time, do the same. I will tell you what's in there, but the most informed you are if you read something like this yourself. But I will read it and I will talk about this because there are some very interesting things about this. Sunak even evaded the question. I think it was it wasn't the BBC. It could have been RTE who asked about the ECJ, and he evaded that a bit by just talking about a lot of other things and then just briefly mentioning the Stormont break. They say they introduce a Stormont break in case of new EU regulations coming up that would not be in line with what Northern Ireland wants. I will have a very close look at this, and I will have a very close look at the part of the ECJ, because Ursula von der Leyen also answered on that one. And she said the ECJ is the ultimate decision maker on EU law regarding the whole thing. And the Stormont break is like an arbitral panel involved on non-EU law. So we will have to see how that is really in detail. And something very interesting I talked about in other videos recently is, although Sunak doesn't have to do it, he will put it to vote in Parliament. And we will see if this reaching of this agreement strengthened him that much in the eyes of the public that the right-wingers in the ERG will not dare to vote against it, so that he will have to vote with the opposition for for his own deal. So that will be another interesting thing, but we will have to wait, and I will definitely make more videos on this topic before we come to the vote, because something else Sunak said several times is that everybody needs time to read everything now and digest it, and especially the DUP. But some of the details with the green lanes and the red lines, I talked about this idea several times, and I talked about this idea, I think it was almost 2 years ago, because the labels that are mentioned again now for the green and red lines to work, this is something the EU and Mauro Šefčovič, the chief negotiator of the EU and vice president of the EU Commission, brought into play 2 years ago. So that's why another question, I think, it was from the Express was so interesting, why it was so easy to conclude these negotiations now with Rishi Sunak and not with his 3 predecessors. Ursula von der Leyen was quite diplomatic there, and she didn't mention the predecessors and their kind of stubbornness on this, because whatever I heard today, we could have had about 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, and spared everyone and spared the people in Northern Ireland all the fuss and all the trouble. But it's not an agreement that's ratified already. So it's still an agreement in principle, and I know that. But there's not, except the Stormont break, however that will what look like, nothing what that was mentioned today in the press conference was new to me. So it will be interesting how much they did. And one thing that would be, and really would be, a success for Sunak is if he gets this through his party and if he gets the DUP to cooperate, is that all the trouble with the EU cannot trust the UK anymore. Well, they will not trust them blindly in the future either. But if they resolve this whole issue, if it will be implemented, and I don't mean a Boris Johnson style, I mean the proper style, then the UK, and that was asked by a Belgian newspaper, I think it was Le Soir, they will start negotiations on the UK joining Horizon Europe. And it is, I mentioned that in other videos, it is not a right the UK has. It is something the EU can grant if everything else is working. And that's what Ursula von der Leyen said in the press conference as well when asked by the Belgian newspaper. As soon as this is ratified, they will talk about Horizon Europe. And there you see what holding up international law and working with the EU means. And for everyone always talking about, they always want to punish it. No, they want to do the best for the people in Northern Ireland, and with it, the best for the people in Ireland. Von der Leyen strengthened that as well. That is what they want. And they didn't want to punish the UK, they want that to work and still protect the single market. And now, with the Windsor framework, the EU is of the opinion that it will protect the single markets of the UK and the EU. She said so in the press conference. If that's true, we'll see when we all read the final framework. I don't have it yet. I can't find anything about it before I was filming this. But we will definitely talk about it, as I said, and we will definitely go through some details here. The trust will not be restored overnight. But Rishi Sunak could have tightened his position, not only by concluding negotiations within a few months his predecessors failed to do in years, but if he gets it ratified and implemented in the UK. Ratifying something in the UK was never a problem. Implementing things in the UK was a problem. And if that works, then it's getting interesting again when we talk about the standing of the Tories with the population, especially in Northern Ireland. But I will not speculate on that. We will see what happens. It's getting very interesting now, because now it's not Britain versus the EU as they always want to play it. Now it's Sunak versus his own party. and I'll see you in my video tomorrow. It will be about one of the other figures of the party, because I thought it necessary to talk about that topic also under these circumstances, not knowing if there is a deal between the EU and Britain or not. But that will always be a shadow in the background, so be curious about tomorrow. I'll see you there. I'll be back.